Hello, Year 8. How is everybody doing? I hope you are all doing very fine. Let's get to today's lesson, travel writing from the student's workbook. It's the first extract. Uh, so let's get to it. All right, the following passage is taken from the book The English Woman in America by Isabella Lucy Bird, published in 1856, and tells of the author's experiences during a visit to America. Read the passage carefully and then answer. Now, I apologize that it looks a bit messy, but I'd already written things on the book that I wasn't able to erase. But it's clear. You can definitely read it. Okay, extract 1. America. We packed ourselves into the stage again with great difficulty, and how the 48 limbs fared was shown by the painful sensations experienced for several succeeding days. Now, a stage or a stagecoach is it's basically a carriage. Okay, it's a carriage. Like we've all seen them in movies, especially movies in the 19th century, etc., etc. Or a stagecoach. It's the same thing. And how the 48 limbs fared was shown by the painful sensations experienced for several succeeding days, several coming days. 48 limbs. How many limbs does a human have? A human being has 4 limbs. So when they say 48 limbs, they're giving an indication of how many people were inside the carriage, right? Or were inside the stage. How they managed, how they found the trip to be, was shown by the painful sensations experienced for several succeeding days. All the passengers, however, were in perfectly good humor and amused each other during the 11 hours spent in this painful way. At an average speed of 6 miles an hour, we traveled over roads of various descriptions: plank, corduroy, and sand, up long heavy hills and through swamps swarming with mosquitoes. So even though they were in great pain due to the travel, they still managed to be cheerful, and their speed was 6 miles per hour, and they traveled through many kinds of roads: plank, which is wood; corduroy, which we will see what that means; sand, up heavy hills; and they went through swamps with mosquitoes, right? Everyone has heard of corduroy roads, but how few have experienced their miseries. All right. They are generally used for traversing swampy ground, for crossing or going through swampy ground, and are formed of small pine trees deprived of their branches. Pine trees that the branches of them have been cut off, which are laid across the track alongside each other. The wear and tear of traveling soon separates these. So what they do is that they put the pine trees without the branches, and they lay them across they're laid across the track alongside next to each other. But what happens, the wear and tear of traveling soon separates these, leaving gaps between, and when added to this, one trunk rots away and another sinks down in the swamp and another tilts up. You may imagine such a jolting as only leather springs could bear. Now imagine one of them rots, one of them sinks, one of them tilts. So a jolt is like a sudden rough movement. So you can imagine, even with the cars, we have a suspension system made specifically to absorb the jolts, or the jolts when we're passing through a bumpy road. So here the suspension was in the form of leather springs. On the very worst roads, filled with deep holes or covered with small granite boulders, a boulder is a large rock, the stage only swings on the straps. So it's barely holding on to any suspension. It's barely holding on to anything. It's swinging. Okay? Ordinary springs, besides dislocating the joints of the passengers, would be rent and broken after a few miles traveling. So leather springs are better than ordinary springs, because ordinary springs aside, so she's being funny or sarcastic here, besides dislocating the joints of the passengers, would be rent. They would be ruined and broken after a few miles of traveling. Even as we were, faces sometimes came into rather close proximity to each other and to the side railings, and had sustained very unpleasant collisions. So basically, they bumped into each other's heads. The amiable man, the nice, friendly man, who was so disappointed with the American climate, suffered very much from the journey. He said he had thought French diligence, which is a type of stagecoach, a French type of coach, was the climax of discomfort, the worst, the most uncomfortable stage that a person could go through. But a stage was misery, oh torture. Each time that we had a rather worse jolt than usual, the poor man groaned, which always drew forth a chorus of laughter. Everybody around him laughed, to which he submitted most good-humoredly. He took it lightly. He took it with good humor. Occasionally, he would ask the time when someone would point maliciously to his watch, remarking 12 hours more or 15 hours more. All right, maliciously in a cheeky or a mischievous way. So the amiable man would ask about the time, and occasionally he would ask about the time when someone would point maliciously, saying, to give that person a look or to give a cheeky smile, 12 hours more, 15 hours more, to see their reaction, because you know that they don't want that. When he would look up with an expression of despair. All right, the bridges were a very un-English feature. How? Over the small streams or brooks, like the small rivers, they consisted of 3 pines covered with planks without any parapet. Now, parapet is the side of a roof or a bridge or stairs. It's like that high wall, or they stop you from falling over. That's what a parapet is made for. It stops you from falling over. Many of us lean on it if we're leaning from the roof, for example. So it says, without any parapet, with sometimes a plank out and sometimes a hole in the middle. That's what the bridges were like. 3 pines covered with planks without any parapet, with sometimes a plank out and sometimes a hole in the middle. Over large streams, they were wooden erections of the most peculiar kind. Now, just talking about the bridges over large streams, all right? Now, the bridges over large streams were wooden erections. To erect something is to build it, all right? So they were wooden buildings of the most peculiar kind with high parapets. Now, ones don't have parapets and the others, they have high parapets. Their insecurity being evidenced by the notice, so they were insecure. And proof of that is that they were noticed, the insecurity was evidenced by the notice, walk your horses according to law. A notice generally disregarded by our coachman as he trotted his horses over the shaking and rattling fabric. In Nova Scotia, the animals seemed to be more carefully lodged. So that's the place, Nova Scotia. The animals seemed to be more carefully lodged than humans. They were accommodated. They were taken care of much better than humans. Wherever we changed horses, we drove into a lofty shed opening into a large stable with a boarded floor, scrupulously clean, extremely clean, generally containing 20 horses. The rigor of the climate in winter necessitates such careful provision for the support of animal life. The severity of the climate, of the winter climate, you have to provide, you have to give such animal support to maintain their lives, right? So the rigor of the climate in winter necessitates such careful provision for the support of animal life. The coachman went into the stable and chose his team, which was brought out, and then a scene of kicking, biting, and screaming ensued, ended with the most furious kickers being put to the wheel. The most furious kickers, the ones filled with life, the strongest ones. And after a certain amount of talking and settling the mailbacks, the ponderous vehicle moved off again, the leaders always rearing the first few rides. The ponderous, the heavy vehicle. The heavy vehicle is difficult to move because it's so heavy due to the people and everything on it. For 60 miles, we were passing through woods. The trees sometimes burned and charred for several miles, and the ground all blackened round them. So the trees burned and charred, they became black for several miles, and the ground all blackened around them. We saw very few clearings. Now, a clearing is a part of the forest that's been cleared out in order to be used. So we saw very few clearings, and those there were consisted of merely a few acres of land separated from the forest by rude snake fences. They were separated by snake fences. Stumps of trees. Now, stump of a tree is when you cut off a tree and you leave that part that's just a short part that's growing from the root. Stumps of trees blackened by fire stood up among the oat crops, but though they look extremely untidy, even though they didn't look very nice, they look very untidy. Are an unavoidable evil for 2 or 3 years till the large roots decay. So the stumps of trees would be there until they just rotted away, so they can use the area. Okay, so this is just about it regarding the extract of Lucy Bird on her travel to America. We're supposed to do the questions. It's clear. Pretty sure, hopefully, you can read everything. And if you have any question, do not hesitate in contacting me. Thank you, Year 8.